Hello and welcome to Attacking Third, a CBS Sports soccer podcast. I'm Sandra and Herrera, lead NWSL writer for CBS Sports. Joined today, as always, by my colleague and co-host, Lisa Roman, broadcaster and analyst for CBS Sports. We are introducing a new segment here. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Title IX throughout the month of March with Title IX Tuesdays. We've spoken with some incredible women who are true game changers in their fields, from athletes to Olympians and more. And today we are so lucky to be joined by another trailblazer in their own sense. We have a very special guest, Amy Trask. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for including me in the discussion. It really and truly is my honor and pleasure to join you for this conversation.
We were both so excited, Lisa and myself, to have you hop onto the show. Just for folks out there, our listeners who are unfamiliar with who you are and your role in the sports landscape. You're sports executive, former CEO of Oakland Raiders, NFL's first female front office executive. You were honored in 2019 as one of the greatest game changers in NFL history, and you're currently serving on the board of the Big Three basketball league. So it's a huge resume for folks who might be unfamiliar with you in terms of your accomplishments. And in honoring the 50th anniversary of Title IX, civil rights law in 1972, that has since evolved, and it means obviously so much more now, right, in the present day. And in your own words, Amy, to sort of kick off our celebrations, for you, what is Title IX?
Well, I'll start by noting that many of your fans, many of the people who enjoy your content, probably weren't born when Title IX was enacted. And I don't even want to know if you guys were born when Title IX was enacted. You probably were not. I was a kid, a little kid, but I was a kid when Title IX was passed. So I have a perspective that spans many decades. And it's very, very hard for many people to imagine, and really for me to imagine as well, that it was only enacted in my lifetime, and that it hasn't been around forever and ever. It took too long, and it has made a difference in a lot of lives.
I agree with that. I'm always amazed and shocked that it wasn't just the norm forever, and that things really did have to evolve and change. And before we dive all into that, I have to say, I love the baseball cap, sporting some CBS Sports Network. I see Amy, love to see that. What's with the wardrobe choice today? I love it for our show.
Oh, well, it is sort of an interesting wardrobe choice because it is a cap, but I did get dressed up. I have earrings on. Right. So we've got the baseball cap and we've got earrings. I want you to know I did dress for you. The answer is the cap gives me the confidence to look into this camera and have this conversation with you. I have, ever since I was a very, very little girl, had a tremendous insecurity about my appearance. We all have insecurities. Overcoming them feels pretty good. And baseball caps give me the confidence I need to jump on camera with you. I really think whoever invented the baseball cap should, or whoever, if it was one person or multiple people, should receive the Nobel Prize retroactively, because it really does. And, look, I'm sounding silly about it, but the fact is, being on camera is the scariest thing I have ever done. When I left the Raiders and was contacted by CBS Sports Network about joining the CBS Sports Network family, my immediate hard reaction was no, 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 no. I was like Khrushchev in the missile crisis when he slammed the table and said, "Niet, niet, niet." Now, I know a lot of you weren't alive, but you might want to Google that. It was a very interesting moment in history. I just said, no. I can't go on camera. I'll never go on camera. Being on camera is the scariest thing I've ever done. I'm tremendous. Look, if you go back and you look at family movies from when I was growing up, I'm the one person in the family who was never in them, because I would see a camera and run so fast the other direction. Similarly, all my years with the Raiders, when I was on the sideline pregame, if I saw a television camera coming my way, people teased me that I ran so fast the other way that Al Davis, for those who don't know, the owner of the team, would have signed me to play defensive back. That's how fast I ran from the cameras. So I said no initially, and quite a few times. And finally, someone in what I refer to as my village very quietly said to me, "Amy, let it go." And that resonated with me. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. And I jumped in to joining CBS Sports Network, could not be happier that I did so. My first week on television, I said to the producer at the time, I said to Sean, I'm so scared. I think I'm going to throw up all over myself when we go live.
Aw.
And his response was, "Oh, we would get so many YouTube views for that." So I laughed, we all laughed. And my then teammate, Bart Scott, who was on the show with us, held my hand every single moment that we weren't on camera. He actually held my hand. And when we'd go live again after a commercial, he'd let go of my hand. I would tough it up, I would do it. And he held my hand. And I'm sharing all of this with you probably at more length than you would like, because I think it's important that kids, not just little girls, not just little boys, teenagers, men, women, understand we all have something about which we're insecure. And sometimes saying, okay, I'm going to let it go is really, really exciting. And baseball caps give me the confidence to do that.
Would you say that like rocking the baseball cap is maybe a not so secret superpower, so maybe a secret weapon in your arsenal that you can have? I know for myself and Lisa, and even for the three of us chatting a little bit off mic, we talked a lot about being able to establish ourselves comfortably, right, in our environments, in these spaces that maybe sometimes require us to go in front of a camera. I know for some of our listeners who've been with us since day one, who view our show in the video component for YouTube versus the audio component on a podcast, have seen me wear a baseball cap from time to time. I've seen Lisa wear a baseball cap from time to time, and I'm not sure people realize that the concept of kind of maybe a little bit of broadcast, right, anxiety is very real for some folks, and it's not just from younger folks in the younger generations, but adults, grown adults as well.
Well, I love your use of the word superpower. I may adopt that. I've never, ever been frightened about speaking publicly. I've spoken publicly throughout my career. It's the camera that scares me. And when I do this myself, I grew up in a family. I never learned how to do my own hair. I never learned how to put on makeup. CBS has, I think they bring the people in from Hogwarts, because these people that come in to do our hair and makeup are magicians. I don't know how to do that. So, and by the way, if this entire camera tips over, it's because we're about to be invaded by a cat. I don't know how to do my own hair or my makeup in a manner that gives me confidence. I never have known that. So superpower, yes, but it lets me hide. It lets me hide a little bit. And that gives me confidence, because the lack of confidence on my part simply relates to my appearance.
You mentioned it as a lack of confidence, yet you are an analyst. You are on CBS Sports Network. So how did you get to this point, besides overcoming all of your fears and letting go of that? But like, when you look back through your career and really where you started, specifically, let's look at one of your most notable roles as CEO of the Oakland Raiders. You didn't just walk into the office and get that role. It started well before that. You started as an intern there as you were a student. So when you look back at that point, and now you are on television and you've overcome so many obstacles and so many fears of yours, what was your goal when you started way back then as a student?
Well, I will just note before I jump into that, because you made a tremendous point I wish to address, but I will just note the lack of confidence is not in what I have to say. I've never lacked confidence in sharing thoughts, in speaking. I'm confident in what I have to say. The lack of confidence is in the way I look. And that dates back to when I was a little girl. You made a tremendous point, Lisa, about not just waking up one day and saying, I'm going to be a CEO, or I'm going to be a head coach, or I'm going to be the president of a business. You have to work your way into those positions. And that's why it's so terrific to see businesses, not just in the sporting world, but businesses in general, creating opportunities for those who've not traditionally had them to work their way up through organizations. And frankly, any organization that does any business, sports or otherwise, that does not hire without regard to race, gender, ethnicity, or any other individuality, which has no bearing whatsoever on whether one can do a job, deserves to fail.
Listening to you talk about this process and the role that your beginning role to the role that it eventually led to, the concept of going from intern to CEO, right? This ladder that is that people sort of look at. Is there ever a moment in this process, when maybe you're not realizing that it is a ladder that you're climbing? And is there ever a moment where like there was like a light bulb that went out and you sort of just asked yourself like, I can do this? Like if in the moments of self-doubt, is there ever a light bulb that goes on that says, wait a minute, I can be the CEO of this organization that maybe typically doesn't have people who look like me in this position?
That's a fascinating question. I've never considered that, whether there was a moment. Nothing occurs to me off the top of my head. Maybe if I give it some thought as we're talking, something will occur to me. But Lisa, to your earlier question, I didn't have a plan. People said, well, what was your plan when you joined the organization? What did you believe your trajectory would be? What did you want your trajectory to be? I had no plan whatsoever. I joined as an intern, ultimately then was hired on a full-time basis. And I was simply thrilled to be part of a team and to contribute in any way I could. I had no eye on advancement. I had no eye on trajectory. I was simply thrilled to be part of the organization. And I worked hard. I worked really, really hard. And I did anything and everything I could that I thought would be a positive contribution.
When you look back at that moment and starting, obviously it's become more prevalent to have women in sports roles and in sports industries and sports organizations. But for someone like me, I work in sports, but every day in my production meeting with other producers, there are 12 other dudes and me. I'm the only female in our meetings. And I'm used to that being in this world. But for you, as someone who was not just a woman in the room, but a woman leading the room, a woman being in charge of the meeting and organizing it, what went through your mind? Were there any thoughts that came out to you when you looked around and you didn't see as many females as males?
Well, the reason you saw me smiling as I was when you were describing your experience of walking into a woman, when I joined the Raiders, it was, I'd say the kind of early part of the mid 80s was when I was an intern. And then I joined the organization on a full-time basis in the mid 80s. And when I went to my first NFL owners meeting, I was the only woman in the room. And that was the case for a number of years. Ultimately, that changed. Jeannie Bonk with the Chargers. Hannah Gordon is now with the 49ers. So I did see some progress, but you're absolutely right. We've had a similar experience is what I'm stating poorly. When I joined the Raiders, I was the only woman. When I went to my first league meeting, I was the only woman. And the answer is, I didn't think about it. And here's why. Well, first of all, as a basis, I recognize the good fortune I had. I worked for a business owner, Al Davis, who was utterly unconcerned with the fact that I was a woman. He didn't care. This is a man who hired Tom Flores, and then he hired me, and then he hired Art Shell. He hired people without regard to race or gender. And it was never lost on me, the great fortune I had working for someone like him. I mean, look, when I was hired by the Raiders, that hadn't been done before by an NFL team. But to your question about what did I think when I walked into a room, whether a meeting at the Raider offices, whether with players or coaches or municipal leaders, bankers, business partners, Raider ownership, or when I walked into a league meeting and I was the only woman, I didn't care. I didn't think about it. It just never made sense. By the way, it still doesn't make sense to me to walk into any setting with the hope and the expectation that no one is going to be thinking about my gender if I'm thinking about my gender. This may not be the right way for everyone to proceed, but it worked for me. And by the way, if I went into a meeting and other people were thinking about the fact that I was a woman and I wasn't giving it any thought, well, advantage me, because I'm not wasting my time thinking about something that was utterly irrelevant to the meeting.
Love that. I love listening to you talk about your process of that if you're not keeping that in the front of your mind, then maybe that's also going to be reflecting amongst the others who are in the room with you. Staying with this a little bit, when we're talking to you, looking back, right, on your professional career as a whole, whether it was starting out in this industry or even now, because, you know, Lisa's speaking to her personal experiences with recency, and I can also relate to that as well. And so in terms of this timeline from beginning or whether to present day, were there moments though of perhaps a tough moment where you had to encounter, you know, discrimination based on gender?
Well, I don't consider this a tough moment. I actually handled it in a manner that was, and let me back up and say, I will share with you how I handled the situation. And I will clearly note that it doesn't mean it's the right way for everyone to handle a situation. The best advice I ever received in my life was from my mom, who told me from the time I was a little girl, and as moms can do, she told me over and over and over and over as I grew up, to thine own self be true. And the reason I note that now is I handled something in a manner that was true to myself. It doesn't mean it's the right way for everybody. I went to that first league meeting I referenced. And before the league meetings, people gathered in the back of the room and there was coffee and a little bit of breakfast. And then the meeting was called to order. So I was in the back of the room and having a cup of coffee, and the owner of a team approached me and asked me to get him coffee. So on just a moment, it took me just a second to decide what I wanted to do. And I looked at him and I said, sure, how would you like that? Because I knew that in a moment or two, the meeting would be called to order and he would see that I wasn't leaving the room. I was staying for the meeting. Because when he asked me to do that, I looked around and I realized that was the moment I realized I was the only woman in the room who wasn't part of the catering staff. So he walked up to me, assuming I was with the catering staff, and asked me to get him coffee. So I looked at him and I said, sure, how do you take that? And he told me, and I got him his coffee and handed it to him. And within a few moments, the meeting was called to order and we all walked to our seats. And when he saw me take a seat in the meeting room, it was as if you could see the blood draining from his face. Well, I looked at him and I started laughing, and he looked at me and he started laughing, and we both enjoyed a good laugh. And from that moment on, for almost the next 30 years, every single league meeting, he walked up to me and said, how would you like your coffee? May I get you some coffee? How would you like that? And you know, he wasn't at every meeting for the next 30 years, but it was almost the 3 decades I was in the league meeting. He would walk up to me and say, may I get you coffee? And the fact is, for that period of time, he became, from the moment I met him that day, one of my biggest supporters and advocates, and he encouraged me and supported me in every way he could. And I share this with you because I've been criticized for the manner in which I handle that. Some people have said to me, you should have addressed him sternly, you should have taken him down, you should have yelled at him. Well, I handled it in a manner that was true to myself, and it was effective and it was fun. So my message in all of this is, be true to yourself. When you encounter a moment like that, handle it in a manner that feels right to you. And for me, it worked.
You know, having that advice from your mother, just sort of be able to reach into that and sort of, you said it took you like a second to go ahead and decide that that's how you wanted to handle it. Would you say that was that particular moment, maybe a way in that advice from your mother, the way in which you tried to approach any and all scenarios that could potentially be uncomfortable like that?
It is the best way I've ever handled anything. All of what I would consider my mistakes, my bumbles, my fumbles, my stumbles have been when I haven't handled something in a manner that is true to myself. I don't have any regrets when I handle something in a manner that is right for me. My regrets in business are when I pushed that aside and handled something in a manner that I didn't find true to myself. And by the way, in the spirit of candor, I will note that when my mother said, to thine own self be true, again, that started when I was a very little girl. It wasn't until I was well into college that I learned that it was William Shakespeare who wrote that, and that my mother didn't invent that. She was simply quoting him. But whether it comes from Shakespeare or my mom, it's the best advice I've ever received.
I mean, that experience at the start of the league meeting, at the start of your tenure when you were with the Raiders, And then now after the 30 years to kind of see how that evolves, how did the industry I'm going to use the term industry, but that just means like the other people working in the industry and overall, how did the industry's perception of women being in those league meetings and being game changers, how did their perception change over the 30 years that you were involved?
I don't know that there was a change for the industry as the whole. Certainly the perception of some changed, the perception of others did not. I shared the story of the gentleman who asked me to get him coffee. If it's okay with you, I will share a story on the other end of the spectrum at the outset of my career, because this is the way things should work. And it answers your question as to how the industry changed. For some, the industry didn't change and didn't need to change. For others, it needed to change, and it has changed or is changing. And for others, it hasn't changed at all. Very, very, very early in my career, I was on our practice field, standing on the sideline. It was towards the end of practice, so the media had been allowed in. And I was entertaining some of our partners. And one of the media members in attendance yelled out in a voice, not a scream, not a shout, but used a voice clearly intended for a lot of people to hear, and said to Jean Upshaw, who was there at practice, "Jean, what's it like having a girl work for the Raiders?" And in his booming, booming voice, Jean said, "She's not a girl, she's a Raider." Well, that was in the 80s. And my point in sharing that is some people didn't need to change their views. They held them all along. Some people still need to change their views, and nothing has helped them do so.
I'm just like, I'm loving it, like listening to you.
I
I'm
love
getting
that
lost in
story.
I'm getting like lost in the story. I'm like still sitting on like, she's not a girl, she's a Raider, in terms of connecting that to
When
perceptions
Jean
of the
said
industry.
that, and for those who are watching or listening who don't know, Jean Upshaw was a mountain of a man, both physically and intellectually, morally, and otherwise. He was a mountain of a man. And when Jean Upshaw, standing on the sideline in a booming voice, said that, I almost popped. My heart popped. I almost exploded at how touched I was that he did that. And that set a tone for many people.
Amy, you actually wrote a book about this amazing life that you've lived as a professional, about being a female executive specifically. You Negotiate Like a Girl, Reflections on a Career at the National Football League, where we're talking to you all about it. What was it about the writing this book? What prompted or inspired you to write a book like that?
I love to write. There was a period in my life where I thought, well, maybe I'll be like, Jessica Fletcher, and I'll go live somewhere and write mystery novels. And again, for all of you who are too young to know, Jessica Fletcher, Murder, She Wrote, Google it, great TV series. But I thought, maybe I would write spy novels or mystery novels. And then there was a period of time I thought maybe I'd be a journalist. I just love to write. So my thought process was, let me write some of this down. I didn't write it thinking, oh, it's going to be a book. I wrote it because I enjoyed writing, and I had made the decision to step away from the Raiders, and I wanted to write down some of those memories. And I was approached about writing a book, and so it turned into a book.
Throughout your career, you've been a leader and you've been a role model in this sense. I mean, you wrote a book about it, which, without giving anything away with the book, from Raiders CEO to chairman of Big Three, the LA Sports and Entertainment Commissions Board, powerful. These are powerful, high-ranking roles for you. Being in these executive positions, what have you learned about your own personal leadership styles, and especially how they compare to male counterparts of yours?
Great question. The most important thing I learned, and it is so important, to thine own self be true, is the best advice there is. If you are going to be a leader, if you wish to be a leader, if you have a career as a leader, be true to yourself. Lead in the manner that feels right to you. You can't, look, as I said earlier, the only regrets I have, look, I've made mistakes. I've made plenty of mistakes. The mistakes I regret are when I tried to be something or be someone I was not. I don't regret anything, mistake or otherwise, when I was true to myself. So some of the things that I did that I think were important in leadership are encourage people that it's okay to make a mistake. And in doing that, let them know when you make a mistake, because nothing is going to encourage others with whom you work to acknowledge mistakes than if you acknowledge mistakes. I often said to staff at staff meetings and otherwise, look, if you're a surgeon and you scream out, "Oh no," or something worse in the middle of a surgery, that could be a problem. If you are a fighter jet pilot and you're flying 500 miles an hour upside down and you scream, "Oh crap," that could be a problem. But in the business world, making a mistake is not the end of the world. It might cost money to fix it. It might cause a little bit of whoop-de-doo, but it's not the end of the world. So I encouraged people to not only know that it was okay to make a mistake, but to let me know when they made a mistake. And the way I did that is by saying, look, when I make a mistake, I'm going to tell you guys I made a mistake, and I'm going to look to have you help me fix it. And every single time I made a mistake, an error in judgment, a mistake in terms of how I approached a situation, I would gather appropriate staff together and I would say, I made a mistake, help me fix it. And everyone was eager to help me fix it. And I let them know, when you make a mistake, tell me, and I'm going to do everything I can to help you fix it. And by the way, they got pretty smart and realized the bigger my mistake, the more ice cream sundae fixings I would have at that meeting where I called them in to help me fix the mistake. Because if there was a full conference table full of every flavor and every topping imaginable, they knew it was a big mistake.
I'm learning so much from this. I'm learning so much. I mean, make the mistakes, own up to your mistakes and admit them, wear baseball caps. I am like growing with confidence.
Ice cream toppings. Put that on your notes too.
You know, I made a pretty significant error in judgment at one point in my career before I was named CEO. And the reason I note it was before that is it obviously didn't keep Al from advancing me to that position. But I made a very significant error in judgment. I misread a situation as to how someone outside of the organization was interacting with us. And the mistake I made in judgment, the error in judgment, cost us a lot of money. So at one point I walked into Al's office and I said, I made a mistake. I misread this situation. I explained it all to him. And I said, you know, if you would like to fire me, I understand that. He didn't say anything. He didn't look up from what he was doing. I stood there a while. I finally walked out. Well, it was eating at me and haunting me. So a couple of days later, I walked, maybe a day or two later, I walked back into his office. I explained it again. I said, look, it was a big mistake. Here's how much it cost us. If you want to fire me. Again, said nothing. I walked out. Finally went in a third time. I said, let me make this easy for you. I'll fire myself. And he finally looked up and he said, you made a mistake. It cost us money. You're not going to make, and by the way, there were F-bombs all through what he was saying, but I'm not using the exact quote, but it was littered with F-bombs. And he said, you made a mistake. I know you won't make the same mistake again. And as I'm walking out, he laughed to himself. He said, you'll make other mistakes. You just won't make this same one again. And again, it was funnier the way he said it because there were F-bombs throughout there. But the message he conveyed to me in the manner he conveyed it was, you made a mistake. It cost us money. I know you won't make this mistake again. And then he added the fun part, which is you'll make other ones. But he had that view as well.
I love that. I think listening to you share, the moments in which maybe at the time felt like failures, right? To sort of kind of work through them and utilize them now as moments of personal experience. It's been a joy to chat with you and hear you speak about this in terms of your career and how we're celebrating things really with Title IX here on Attacking Third. So, I guess to maybe close out, maybe to end on maybe a little bit of a reflective question, perhaps, we've come a long way, right? In the last 50 years or so in terms of gender equality, but there's always work to be done. right? How much further do we need to go? And what are your dreams, for the next 50 years?
I love the way you phrase that question, because whenever we see a woman advanced in sports or otherwise, I'm asked, are you excited? And my answer is sure. But what's going to be really exciting is when these moments are no longer newsworthy because they're the norm. And you're only asking me if I'm excited because it's newsworthy. This shouldn't be newsworthy. Look, when Apollo 13 was up in space and that spacecraft had a problem, do you think the men on Apollo 13 cared who was sitting around that table in NASA trying to figure out how to get them back to Earth alive? Do you think anyone on Apollo 13 cared if the people in NASA were men or women? Do you think they cared about their race or their ethnicity or their religion or their age? They just wanted to get back to Earth alive. And what's going to be really exciting is when that's everyone's view.
I love it. Let's end on that. Amy Trask, we want to thank you so much for joining us on Attacking Third and sharing your story with our listeners. We also like to take the time towards the end of episodes to thank our listeners. So thank you to our audience for joining us today. You can follow us on Twitter at Attacking Third for more. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and anywhere you listen to your podcast shows. We're also available as video. Please subscribe to us. Visit youtube.com/Attacking Third. And we'll be back next Tuesday with more Title IX Tuesday coverage. For Sandra Herrera, Lisa Roman, and Amy Trask, this was Attacking Third.